So we watched Dune Part 2. We have done a video on Dune Part 1 if you guys want to check that out. After doing that video, I went back and rewatched the first movie in preparation for this one, and I liked it more the second time, watching it not as much as an adaptation, but just as a movie. But it also made the differences between the two movies more apparent.
Yeah, and there were a lot.
Yeah.
It was kind of weird to think the same people behind the first one were behind this one.
And I wonder how much of that was the fact that the second part hadn't been greenlit when they made the first movie. So I wonder if they kind of tried to make the first one work a little more as its own thing to get a better chance of making another one.
Yeah, but I felt part 2 was a more traditional movie. So you would think, if anything, they would make the first one more traditional because it's less risky.
In some ways, I agree, but I guess the way I feel about it is I think maybe some of the complexity of the story was left out in the first movie so that they wouldn't kind of overload people too much.
Yeah, that's true. There was a lot more navigation required story-wise for this one.
Yeah, and I actually wonder if people that haven't read the book, and I said this even with the first part, if people would be confused. I think it's more likely that they'd be confused with the second part because there are so many ideas and characters to keep track of and so many things that aren't really explained in the movie. You just kind of are expected to go along with it. I think of like the water of life, for example.
See, I disagree. In this one, characters outright explained what they were doing and what they were going to do next. Whereas the first one, characters would take action and you might not necessarily know why they were taking that action in the moment.
That's true. I just wonder if maybe it was too much in this second part for people to be able to keep track of everything. Because if you're not already invested in who some of these characters are, it can be easy to be like, who was that character again? What are they trying to do?
Yeah, but why would you go into a movie called Part 2 if you're not familiar with Part 1?
Well, because that's what I mean, is a lot of those things weren't in Part 1. The Baron's nephew and that whole side of things, and the Emperor and the Princess, Count Lady Fenring, who barely even shows up. It almost feels like it focuses on certain characters for a part of the movie, but then they kind of mostly disappear for a while.
Yeah, and even the main cast is more spread out.
Yeah, and I thought that was something that, in terms of the way this second movie is laid out, I thought the first half or 2/3 worked better than the last section, partially because it was so focused on Paul and getting his perspective on things and why he was doing what he was doing. But then you start bringing in a lot of other things, and then I felt like by the end of the movie, even I didn't really buy the way he was acting and what he was doing. It felt more like you were looking at it more from the outside by the time you get to the end of the movie, instead of really following him as a character.
I agree. And to tie that into the ending, I thought it lent itself to a sequel with Chani as the main character, which I think would be interesting because you and I both felt like at the end of this movie, we were removed from Paul. And to see the events from this point forward play out from Chani's perspective, because she is also no longer in Paul's inner circle because he's ascended to something beyond her reach, I think that would be interesting.
I agree, and we actually talked before we saw this part about how the director, Denis Villeneuve, was talking about maybe doing a third movie that would be an adaptation of Dune Messiah, and we both at the time said that seemed like a bad idea because the first book really is a complete story, and I feel like if they had followed the book a little more closely, I think it would have felt like more of an ending. But I do agree after actually watching Part 2 that it almost feels like it needs a third part with the way it actually ended. I definitely felt like this second part deviated from the book more than the first part did, and that actually ties into the whole reason that a second book was written was because Frank Herbert felt that people were misinterpreting the ending of the first book and seeing it as like a hero's journey kind of thing. But the movie makes it very clear that Paul is not making the right decisions necessarily, that he's definitely making questionable decisions and is not a hero. And I feel like with how much they focused on that and how much they did play up Chani questioning that and not going along with it, I feel like it needs another movie to kind of bring a sense of actual closure to everything, because the movie kind of felt like it just kind of ended.
And I thought her questioning everything, it started as the youth in general, a generational difference between we follow our beliefs versus you old people have all your dumb beliefs. But as the movie went on, even though more people gravitated to Paul's cause, it wasn't the youth. Chani was kind of left on her own, but it's not because the youth left her, it's because the movie just stopped talking about them.
That was one of the differences from the book, where the book had much more of a time span for things to happen, for Paul's reputation to really spread. but the movie takes place over a relatively short period of time and picks up directly after the first one. So I didn't think it was really plausible that all the Fremen would be following him the way that they were when he only has limited actual contact with, a certain number of them, as opposed to the millions that are out there.
I do wish between Paul and Chani there had been a little less teen angst drama. After a while, when it would show the pained anguish of Chani, I found myself thinking, boo f***ing who? Those were the parts where this long movie felt the longest.
And I almost joked that it felt like an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but I actually appreciated that the movie made their relationship, or I guess the development of their relationship, feel a bit more real than it did in the book, where in the book it feels almost like it's just something that Paul already knows is going to happen because he can see the future. I always felt that that was one of the weaker points of the book, was their relationship.
I did believe the coming-of-age teen part of his character, but like you said before, when he started to actively take charge, I didn't really buy that.
Yeah, that's where the movie started losing me. I don't know if this is the plan or not, but if there could be some kind of director's cut that would combine the two movies but shift some of the things that are brought up in the second movie into the first part and kind of spread it out a little bit more and make it a little more even, I feel like maybe that would help. But I do think on the Paul side of things, again, shifting the focus away from him, even having read the book, I was kind of questioning certain things in the movie as to why he was doing what he was doing or what he was thinking about it, and we didn't really get it. It felt like watching a Ridley Scott movie where I always feel like I'm separated from the characters and what their emotions are.
From a cinematography perspective, there seemed to be a lot of super close-ups to Timothée Chalamet's face, but not so much the other characters.
I did feel like there was less focus overall on the visual side of things in this second part, where the first part was so much of spectacle.
Definitely.
And I think those close-ups maybe was the fact that they're playing up kind of the emotional side of things more and the character side.
But as a result, the loss of that grand atmosphere made things much less mysterious. It was less art and more grit.
And I think if they had evened that out again, that's where, again, I think doing a director's cut that moved some of that expositional stuff and those introduction of some of those other characters into the first half might make it feel a little more unified. But I am glad that they brought those elements in, because I was wondering if they were going to just kind of leave some of that stuff out, since it wasn't in the first movie at all. And I'm glad they didn't.
Speaking of, actually, no, we didn't talk about that at all. I'm just going to shift the subject to something else. Talking about characters, I could not take Christopher Walken seriously in that role. And I'm not saying he can't play serious, because he does it very well in some stuff, but this role in particular did not work. And a huge part of it was because the character didn't do anything. Putting such a high-level name in a role that requires no substance was a really odd choice.
I completely agree, but I do wonder if the fact that he feels like he doesn't matter was part of the performance. As in, it was maybe partially Christopher Walken's fault, or the way he was directed or something. It's too distracting that it's Christopher Walken and you're expecting him to be Christopher Walken, and he's not really. So it feels like a weird casting choice from that perspective, but it also feels like kind of a mistake to, like you're saying, have the character not really do anything when he is, in terms of the actual events of the story, he plays an important part. It just doesn't feel like that comes across in the performance.
My two assumptions were either he was a huge fan of the books and expressed interest, or Villeneuve was a big fan of Christopher Walken and wanted to work with him. But I can't imagine what direction he would give. All right, I want you to stand there and don't talk. Oh, that's great.
To a certain extent, this second part, because the first movie was so successful, it almost made me wonder if some of those roles were being selected just because they were big names right now. Some of those new characters that were brought in.
Is Christopher Walken a big name right now?
Well, no. He's a big enough name that everybody's going to know who he is. I mean, when I heard that he was going to be in this second movie, it did make me more interested. I wanted to see what that was going to be like.
Did you know he was going to be the Emperor? I was kind of hoping he would voice the Sandworm or something.
I mean, yeah, if you're going to cast Christopher Walken, think about the fact that you're casting Christopher Walken. You do that for a reason. There are certain roles that he works in, and this just was not one of those roles. It just didn't make sense to use him for that.
I'm just imagining what kind of lines he would have.
Paul, why are you dressed as Muad'Dib?
Let's make a Messiah.
These are not good Christopher Walken voices.
No,
right now,
they're not. I don't even know if they're going to go in.
But it's more than he did in that movie, so.
Let's talk about the sound and the music, which to me in this movie felt like one and the same.
Yeah, Hans Zimmer's score for the first movie just felt like a Hans Zimmer score. And honestly, I thought that was maybe even more exaggerated in this movie in the sense of being just overly simplistic and predictable and not really adding anything to the movie because you're already getting the same sense from the visuals when that big music comes in.
I might change my opinion if I listened to the score on its own, because hearing it while watching the movie, it really got lumped into sound effect territory. But maybe on its own, it would be different.
I doubt it, but I suppose that's possible.
I don't want to offend him too much. You know, he is a patron.
Yeah, but he's at the bottom tier.
Yeah, the one where he doesn't even get recognized.
He doesn't even finish watching our videos. He just stops watching halfway through usually. I did like a lot of the sound effects when it comes to the vehicles and the weapons and that kind of stuff. It did feel unique.
Yeah, not like they just pulled from a stock sound effects bank.
Yeah, and I really like the designs of the vehicles, and it doesn't feel like it's trying to imitate anything else. It really does feel like it's its own thing. Even if, I will say, it doesn't feel very realistic sometimes. It feels like they're going for cool designs just to go for cool designs. And I actually wondered for the black and white scenes on the Harkonnen planet if some of that was intended to evoke H.R. Giger, who was working on a version of Dune back in the 80s. Some of the design work kind of had the biomechanical stuff that you kind of see in Alien, and the fact that it's all black and white, that's usually what his art is like. So I wondered if that was kind of like an intentional choice from that perspective.
Yeah, now that you're saying that, I could see that. Speaking of the Harkonnens, they went from being a more subtle and calculating villain to pretty much a Saturday morning cartoon villain, which was disappointing.
I completely agree, especially with how many random people they kill for no reason, just to be like, hey, look, these are the bad guys, which we already know.
That's actually in my notes. It says randomly stab people for no reason.
I mean, I liked how bad they were, how evil they came across as, but there are ways to do that other than having them act really stupid like that. It was way too much. And also, the way they introduce Fade Routha, who's going to replace the Baron eventually, I felt like they didn't do as good of a job of building him up as I would have liked. And it made that end fight really surprising to me that he was able to stand up to Paul as well as he did.
Yeah, because the only other time we saw him do actual combat was in the arena, but two of the guys were drugged, and one of them was just really tired.
Yeah, I felt like they could have done a better job with that. And that scene was in the book. At least once they said plans within plans, but they didn't really explain what they were talking about. But I liked that they at least kept that stuff in there. But I feel like they could have handled his character a little better. But really, I would say that about a lot of the characters, but there's only so much time you can give to them.
I was going to say the lack of his character development made me raise my eyebrows, but I wouldn't want to offend him because he doesn't have any.
And I guess when it comes to the combat in general, that was one of my complaints of the first movie, was that it felt overly stylized as opposed to feeling like actual fighting. I felt like it was a little better in the second movie, but at the same time, another complaint I had about the first movie was that the Sardaukar didn't feel like as big of a threat as they should have. And I felt like in the second movie, none of the Harkonnens felt like that big of a threat in terms of actually fighting against them. They seemed like they were easy to take down.
I thought the Bene Gesserit schemes and subplots got pushed to the back in this movie, and despite Jessica playing a large role in the movie and having important scenes, in the end, they didn't seem to amount to much. A lot was said about what she was going to do, but I don't think she got enough time dedicated to those actions to make them have the fullest impact they could have had.
Interesting. I agree and disagree.
What a neutral stance.
Well, I agree about some things and disagree about other things. I felt like they played a much bigger part in this second movie than they did in the first movie. In the first movie, I felt like they were mostly in the background, and it was just kind of a thing that, oh, Paul's mom is a Bene Gesserit.
But that added to the mystery.
That's true, but I felt like in the second movie, the fact that they talked about what they were doing and what their goals were, and that really they're the ones even behind the Emperor, to me that made them feel like they were much more important in the second part. But I do agree that by the time you get to the end of the movie, you don't really get their perspective anymore either. For being so important, I kind of wish there had been final lines between Jessica and the other Reverend Mother that was there.
They had one or two lines. They were telepathic. I think one of them said, "You bitch."
And speaking of those lines at the end, they had the other Bene Gesserit say something about an abomination, which in the book, she's referring to Alia, Paul's sister, but she wasn't born in the movie. I was very disappointed by that, because she's my favorite character in that first book, because she's so weird and creepy. A 3-year-old child, I think she is, with the intelligence of an adult and the memories of an entire line of people. Keeping her as just a telepathic thing between Jessica and her, basically, and speaking to Paul as, like a third party, it was disappointing. And we got that one shot of Anya Taylor-Joy as her as an adult, but that's not the same thing. And she will play a bigger part in the third movie, if they make that. But I didn't like her character in the second book, where she seemed like just a mopey teenager.
Would you recommend this movie and the first movie?
I would. I liked the first movie a lot the first time I saw it. I liked it more the second time I saw it. And I'm still kind of torn on which one I liked more, because I like that there's way more story in the second movie, but I feel like it doesn't quite stay coherent through the whole thing, and it kind of loses it toward the end. And I like the spectacle of the first movie, but there wasn't enough story for me.
Yeah, so some kind of mix of a director's cut would be cool.
But I am definitely intrigued to see a third movie at this point.
I hope the special edition of both movies combined comes with a pouch full of sand. But you don't know it, and when you open the box, it rips it open so it just flies everywhere.
As long as it's got some of the spice in it, so you get some weird visions. What did you think between the two parts?
I think I like the first part better because of the visuals and the atmosphere. The second one did a better job in terms of storytelling, but I would recommend both parts. I would also recommend subscribing to our channel. Got to get it in there somewhere.
We do have a lot of those viewers that watch us out of spite, which honestly, those are the ones that reach my heart the most. Even though I know that's not what you want me to say.
I guess the biggest question I have in terms of narrative is, when does he build his chocolate factory?
I forgot about that other tie-in.
So I'm going to be editing this one. I haven't edited a video in a long time. So this one's obviously going to have way more views, which we also haven't seen in a while. And we all know why.
Yeah, because I'm doing Buffy. So thanks, everyone, for being so patient, given that we haven't been putting out as many videos of late, because I am so busy with getting ready for leaving for Japan. By the time this video comes out, I'll be in Japan, probably. But as of this recording, I am still hastily getting everything ready. We'll see what happens, but we are hoping to keep things going.
Plus, once you get over there, you're going to have to find another person that you can mentally sync with when you're in the giant robot.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. I mean, you can watch the training videos, but that's not going to prepare you for the reality, so.
I mean, you can barely walk in step with somebody else.
I can barely do that by myself.
But we're going to keep putting stuff up. Just got to keep being patient. And again, thanks for that. And thanks for watching this video, too.
Yeah, go watch Dune now. Now you have an actual reason, because we told you to.
That's what the internet is, just people telling other people what to do.
And no, we are not sponsored.
I was noticing all the product placement in this second part, when she was like, drink the water of life, and Jessica reached for the Pepsi first. Or when Chani fed Paul her tears, and he woke up and he said, man, I was having such a great nap on my Sleep Number mattress.
What a weird one to pull out. That is, okay.
Yeah, the spice is good, but you know what we really need? McCormick oregano. Thanks for watching.